Welcome to Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to our program, The Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. Today's issue is one of those issues, the sanctity of life. The sanctity, the dignity, the sacredness even, if you will, of life. I mean, this should be a fundamental principle in the whole society. Every one of us should think that way, no matter what party we're part of. Because if people start to view human beings as disposable or commodities again, and we've gone through that nonsense in our history when we didn't live up to our ideals, then what's the point of any of this stuff? Human beings can devolve into tremendous violence once they start to look at each other as if we're not human beings that have a worth, an inherent worth from the God who created them. You know, one of the things that a lot of people say to me is they say, well, you're the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty. What are you doing in Washington, D.C.? Well, we're an advocacy group because we realize that good politics, while it cannot save us, we know that politics can't save us. So for those of you who are looking to your politicians to actually save you or to solve all of these big problems, you're asking too much. But there are certain things that they are to do. They're to be the moral backstop, the referees, if you will, so that we all can live life fairly with one another. And so we're an advocacy group on the Hill, and we advocate for four things. And since government is limited, our engagement of a limited government is limited. And so we advocate for the religious liberty for all people, the sanctity of life for all people, and then the institution of marriage. We fight for that definition, if you will, but we're not asking the government to undergird our position. We're basically asking the government to either limit its nefarious activity to male-female only, but if it can't get out of the whole marriage business, it's a liberty issue, if you will, for us. And then educational freedom. The ability to raise our children in the moral, ethical framework that we think is necessary for a good, healthy, civil life. Well, those are the four things. They matter, and they matter for all people. And we don't want government to live our lives. We want government to be a healthy structure in which we can live our lives. Because if government is anything, it's supposed to be the one that keeps law and order and keeps the bad guys at bay, makes sure that they're the ones that are afraid, and allows the regular folks, the people who are trying to be law-abiding citizens, those who are law-abiding citizens, they shouldn't fear government. Government has a limited role to keep the peace, to make sure that laws are fairly applied, and then really to get out of the rest of our living our lives. And so again, when we come to this issue today of the sanctity of life, this is something that we fight for on the Hill. Why? Because everybody deserves to be treated this way. You know, one of the issues, too, that people say, well, the church shouldn't be involved in this stuff. Folks, that is, you know, I hear it all the time that yours is a religious position. And I chafe at that because technically that's not true. We do not ask the state to undergird our proclamation of the gospel in any way. We just ask that they allow us to be free to preach and teach the whole counsel of God. But inherent in the whole counsel of God, as in other religions, other philosophies, other ideologies, are morals. And so this is a moral issue, not a religious issue. This is a moral issue that's religiously motivated maybe by us, but there are other people who are pro-life people who are not religiously motivated. They just know that pro-life is pro-life. And so again, when we start to think these kinds of issues through, we can't let people define our language because they actually define then the debate. Well, no, let's take it on head on. This is a issue for all people, the sanctity of life, and this could be one of the greatest years for the sanctity, the sanity, and the civility of life in our culture. So on the program today, we are privileged to have Montana Senator Steve Daines. He's here to talk about the incredible opportunity for our country to return to what I call the sanity and the sanctity of life. And he's been a staunch, I guess maybe better adjective is courageous defender of all people's inherent dignity as human beings made in God's image. Welcome, Senator Daines.
Yeah, really glad to be here.
Well, listen, before we begin, I've got to tell you, I have seen the gates of the mountains open and close up front and personal on Holter Lake. And I, like many Americans, would someday love to experience Montana the way that Brad Pitt did in the movie A River Runs Through It. I'm a Michigan man who loves the lakes, but those rivers are incredible. It's a beautiful place, isn't it?
Well, Greg, I'm very fortunate. As I've always said, I didn't get to pick Montana. Montana got picked by my great-great-grandmother, a Norwegian from Norway, Karen Dyrud, who homesteaded not far from the gates of the mountain. Probably
Is that right?
An hour and a half north of there, where she's buried today, that by the Golden West Lutheran Church.
How about
and
that?
On her gravestone, it says, "Saved by grace."
Oh, my goodness.
So that's how my Montana roots began. And I will say this, I was fly fishing on Montana streams before Brad Pitt ruined it for the rest of us. When he came out with Robert Redford and made a big movie, we got discovered.
That's right. Well, I'll tell you, I loved it when I was there. I just wish I could have stayed longer. It's tremendous. Well, we got a lot of people in Montana who support you. They're big supporters of you, and they value your leadership. So, like, right to the topic, because I know you don't have a lot of time with us today. Our effort here in DC is to advocate for religious liberty and the sanctity of life. And when I look at your record on the Hill, and I'm just going to run through a couple of them: the Pain Capable Unborn Child Act, Title 10 Abortion Provider Act, so no family planning money goes to abortionists, Life at Conception Act, the law finally catches up to science. You know, dare I say, are also the fundamental morals of a civil society. And then this last one, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Again, sometimes I just wondered, how come we have to have laws that tell doctors to actually protect children that are actually born in their operating rooms? So my first question to you is, who would be against these things? And why is this a great moment for the pro-life movement as an opportunity to instill this sanctity of life, this value of life for all people? Because this should not be this should be a bipartisan issue.
It really should be. And there's nothing more foundational and basic than the right to life. Right. You go back to our founding fathers when they talked in the Declaration of Independence, these certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You cannot have liberty, you can't have the pursuit of happiness without first having the right to life. And it's very, very troubling, I know, for so many who are listening, about how far to the left, how radical the pro-abortion movement has become, because that Baby Born Alive bill, that's not an abortion bill. That's an infanticide bill.
Right.
It's a baby that is born and breathing outside the womb. And we said, you can't kill that baby if a baby is born as a result of a botched abortion. Right. And yet we cannot get Democrats to support that bill. And that just shows you, first of all, how powerful the pro-abortion lobby is in this country, and how radical. Sadly, I say this as somebody who grew up with a lot of Democrats in our family in Montana who were very different back in those days versus, I think, the radical nature on abortion that the Democrats have today.
Well, and I think you're exactly right on this, because there's 20 million pro-life Democrats today. I work with that group on the Hill, and the fact that it's not on their platform is something I'd love to see change as well. So again, the preciousness of life is a fundamental issue, and a lot of the problems we see today are because people are beginning to think that life can be treated as disposable. So let's also then talk then about your speech on the Senate floor concerning the Democrats' abortion on demand until birth act. I wish everyone could have heard that, and since not everyone did, I'd love you to amplify on that, because share a few main points of your speech, because this was, like you said, this was a law that was to codify abortion all the way to the moment of birth. Wow.
Yeah, well, it is. It was radical. It in fact may indeed have been the most radical pro-abortion bill ever introduced into the United States Congress. they would require that every single state be a late-term abortion state. So it would put us in the same category as China and North Korea.
Right.
It puts us in a very, very terrible category of the most radical kind of 7 countries that would be basically codifying late-term abortion. In fact, it'd be sad to say the United States would be one of the most dangerous places for an unborn baby to be if they would have had their way on the Senate floor. And it's out of step with the American people. 71% of Americans oppose late-term abortions. And I understand how polarizing this issue is, but let's at least on a bipartisan basis agree on stopping late-term abortion. Now, of course, I believe life begins at conception,
right,
but let's at least agree on stopping late-term abortion. We can't even get that agreement in Washington.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, I guess when I look at that particular bill, like you said, not only is it radical because there is no, we would be the most radical, like you just pointed out, and there is no other Western country that's even close to this kind of way of thinking about the unborn child. But explain to our listeners how that bill was a classic political overreaction to the Supreme Court possibly returning abortion back to the representatives. You know, the Dobbs case is the issue. But what is the Dobbs case going to do, and what might it do, and what won't it do?
Right. Now, I'm a chemical engineer by degree. We talked about our science backgrounds, but we're on the air together. So I'm a left brain, more engineer. I'm not a lawyer. But I would encourage those who are listening to this broadcast to spend the time to read Justice Alito's draft opinion. Mm-hmm. It is brilliant. It is well thought out. It's compassionate. And it's important to look at what it says and what it doesn't say. It really isn't about abortion. It's about fundamentally who should decide what protections should be put in place for the unborn. Where does that fundamental power reside? Should it be with 9 guys in black robes from 1973? Or in an issue that is contentious, would it be better if elected officials who are held accountable by the people, let's let them decide where to draw the lines on protections for the unborn? That's the essence of what was decided there. So that means the states will play a very important role, assuming this opinion is held up. There'll still be an important role for elected officials at the federal level as well. But the states will be where a lot of the action will be. And I'll tell you why. Because in the United States Senate, it takes 60 votes to pass a pro-life protection bill. We're going to keep fighting for pro-life here. Mm-hmm. But for realistic outcomes, the states is probably where you're going to see legislation passed and signed by governors.
And that's where people of common good conscience, that's our responsibility. We're the ones that are supposed to build the civil society. We're the ones that are supposed to take care of our neighborhoods and families. You guys here on the Hill, that's not your job. I mean, you know, again, this limited sense of government, it would be wrong to by fiat tell us how we're going to solve this basic fundamental issue. And I think that's what was wrong about the ruling in the first place. They took the Constitution and they legislated with it in such a way that an issue, and we were a pro-life nation at the time of 1973. Mm. And so in one fell swoop, they made the most people's view of this unconstitutional. And if you want to do that, there's an amendment process, right? I mean, there is an amendment process. You can change the Constitution. You just can't do it by fiat.
You think about how radical that bill was that we defeated. We talked about there's no gestational protection, but it's worse than that. It would strike down any state law that would require parental involvement in abortions for minors, an example. It would strike down any late-term abortion limits at a state level. It would strike down any sex-selective or Down syndrome selective abortions. That would be struck down for states if that federal bill would have passed, that Chuck Schumer put on the floor. It would strike down conscience protections, that's a core issue in terms of religious liberty for our country. It would strike down the Hyde protections that say taxpayer dollars cannot be used for abortions. All of that would have been struck down had Chuck Schumer's bill passed the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, and again, corrupting the medical profession, because that was a key issue for me too back in the day, and it is today. Do no harm suddenly means I can do whatever I please as long as I have your consent too, and that's not the kind of, when you have that kind of power over life and death, there needs to be proper moral limitations to it, or all kinds of bad things, incredibly bad things can happen.
I've got to tell you, I've had students, now the Capitol opened up again post-COVID. I'm having the student groups come back. Each of us, I have groups, of course, from all over Montana that come, these high school students and middle school students. And this question's come up, of course, after the leak happened from the Supreme Court. They're asking about Roe v. Wade. And what I do is I ask them a question, because I believe that people believe what they discover for themselves. Self-discovery is very important to get to truth. And I asked them with their smartphone, I said, Google 15-week baby. Just type in 15-week baby, hit search under Google. And it pops up an image. And I say, click on images and look at the image, the 3D ultrasound of that 15-week baby. Why do I ask them that? Because that's what the Dobbs case was drawing the line at 15 weeks. And I just asked the question, no matter where you stand on abortion, I asked, is that life or not? I asked them the question, if you were a NASA scientist and they sent the Mars lander and the Mars lander image came back with that image, would the scientists conclude that is life or not? And listen, I know the answer because they all look at that. Even though I can see some of the pro-abortion students, they don't have a response. So I'm not telling them what to believe.
Right.
I'm asking them to think about what they believe.
About it. And you did that in your speech too, because you made a great point when you just said the unborn sea turtle eggs and unborn eagle eggs have more protection than unborn humans, federal protection. But I got to say this, you were caricatured immediately as saying that women are like turtles. I mean, I heard that, and they were trying to make fun of what you said and everything. I said, no, it was one of the best points you made. Those of us who say, well, what is this protection about? You said, you can actually go to jail for messing with turtle eggs and be fined mercilessly for messing with eagle eggs. You
can't. If you mess with the nests, you can go to prison.
Right.
Up to $100,000 fine for a preborn turtle or eagle.
Right.
So why would a preborn turtle or eagle have more protections than a baby?
How do you deal with this? Is one of the things I've been in radio for almost a decade now, and how people caricature. We should be trying to get at. I've got you on here to amplify your voice, but also to make sure we can clarify so we know what you're saying. Well, when people caricature an excellent point and then they try to demonize it, that's the opposite of what we should be doing with information media, isn't it?
It is. Well, and listen, anytime we're standing for truth, and what I said on the Senate floor was the truth. Mm-hmm. And when you have, frankly, an evil, I'm going to call it evil movement in murdering these babies, we're getting a little too close to the target for them. And so what they do is they'll pivot and demonize the message instead of really responding thoughtfully to a counter argument. You know why? There's not a counter argument to it. It's just the truth. And the more we get this out to the American people, the more I think we'll continue to change opinion here as they really thoughtfully consider what is going on there at 15 weeks, at 16 weeks, in these last terms of pregnancy. Those are human beings. They're little babies that deserve the right to life.
Well, and Dobbs does get right to the heart of it, because it's the first time the viability aspect of Roe v. Wade is coming up for the vote. And people, just so you understand what that is, and I think we've heard it, but we really haven't thought about its implications. The state's main role in our lives is to protect the weak, the vulnerable from the abuses of the strong, to protect law-abiding citizens from those with criminal intentions. And really, for the first time, we have a law that actually protects the strong against the weak, that legalizes the ability for the strong to actually dispense with the weak as long as they're not viable and can't fight back. And so to me, it was, if people actually sat down and said, wow, is the state able to do that? That's not really a good thing. We saw that in the spirit of the Democrats' bill, didn't we?
We did. Well, let's remember, why God put government in place in the first place. And that was really, it's a restraint of the evil tendencies, because, as Reformed thinkers here, as somebody who grew up baptized and confirmed Lutheran myself, we understand the doctrine of total depravity and the need for grace.
Right.
We live in an evil world. And consequently, the role of government is to protect the weak. And especially in our country, we don't allow mob rule. We believe in the inalienable rights. And those are protected, even if you're in the minority, and these little babies don't have a voice. So the real question comes down to, is this life or not? If it is life, then the next argument is, okay, you're protected. And it's similar, of course, to the battle we fought in this country on slavery. The question is that slave a human being that deserves the protection of the Constitution, or is it simply property that the slave owner owns? We fought a war over that. And ultimately, we came to the conclusion, and rightfully so, that they are human beings afforded all the rights of our Constitution. That's the battle on abortion. Is this a baby and a life or not? Because if it is, then they should be protected.
Yeah, and this is another great point that you make, that, stare decisis, Dred Scott. If stare decisis is true, then Dred Scott doesn't get overturned, and it rightfully should, because it went against our foundational principles, and it was arrogant, and it was judicial overreach, and it literally took a civil war, like you said, to finally resolve that question to a degree. But here we are again with people saying, well, why can't elite judges just determine these issues for us? Because these are moral issues that are bigger than the judiciary. That's why. So again, Senator Daines, I think the reason why I wanted to encourage you, and that's one of our jobs too on the Hill, is to encourage people that are engaging this fight. And so just know that you have a lot of us behind you in that regard. And like I said before, to those of you who are listening in, this is not a Republican Democrat issue. This is a fundamental issue, what it means to be human. And so
it really is. And thanks for stating that too. And I guess I want to be careful. I don't come across overly partisan on this, because I'm just looking at the reality that we see here on the Hill now. I'm talking about the elected officials. It has sadly become a very partisan issue. But I love the fact we've got 20 million pro-life Democrats.
Right.
We need those pro-life Democrats to continue to shout loudly for their views as they're influencing the platforms in the party and elected officials, to hold them accountable that their voice is really, really important in this moment in history. And I just encourage them to not give up, but to stand firm. You don't have to become a Republican. Just continue to influence the Democrats here.
Get it on the platform. And I think that's, and like we said too, look, one of our mantras is good government can't save us, but bad government can destroy us. That's kind of the Lutheran view of government. Yeah. But in the whole point is, folks, this is the kind of stuff that's going to come with changed hearts. It's going to come with people serving one another. It's going to come with people actually caring for each other. And so all my life, I've seen what happens when people of goodwill get together on this, and we have to reinstill the value of life, because if you don't have a value of life, well, then politics isn't going to help, and none of this is going to be stopped. But also reinstating and empowering the family, all these kinds of things are the solutions to this, and that happens in our neighborhoods, in our homes, and in our own self-government, right?
It really does. And I'll tell you, I just was speaking to a group yesterday about faith and liberty and so forth. Washington, D.C. has limited capacity to really change hearts. It's not really our fundamental role. That really is back in our communities. That's back in our churches. And that's why when you look at freedom, I love Oz Guinness, who's an author here in our country. Oz is a good friend of mine. Oz talks about the freedom triangle. In other words, true freedom requires virtue. Sure. And virtue requires faith. And actually, faith requires freedom. And so it's that circle there. We've got to come back to the important role that I think about. Again, I'm so grateful for my Reformed heritage, my multi-generational Lutheran background that started back in Norway during the revivals that swept through Norway in the 1800s. That affected our family and our legacy of faith and our Montana roots. And so I just want to encourage you. It comes back to faith and virtue. Very important part of what we need here in our country.
Well, as a Finn, I'm 50% Finnish, so we're a little bit on the other side of the bay there, I think. But same great heritage, and my family settled in northern Michigan. But what you just said, and I think our people know this too. The law doesn't transform us. The law can prevent us. It can provide backstops, protection. It's going to have to be changed hearts. It's actually love that finally does that, like you said, faith and love and virtue and action. And the government, that's not the proper role of government. Government's not the faith, love entity in our world.
No, I'll tell you some great letters, of course, that John Adams wrote to Abigail just before they inked the Declaration of Independence. Profound words. And the the apprehensions that John Adams had about this experiment called America, because they're going to transfer the power to the people. Right. And the people needed to have virtue and self-restraint. And that comes from faith, ultimately. Right. And that's our good works don't get us to heaven. Our good works are a result of what God has done for us through his grace and mercy. And that's the most civil society we can have. When you have that basis, you live a life of gratitude and service, and not what do I deserve. And that's just the important role of the church cannot be overstated in this moment in history.
Well, I sure appreciate having you on today. What an exciting time it is, I think, for life in our country. And I mean that sincerely, everybody's life, the cherishing of life. It's such a fundamental principle. It's what good government should undergird, and it's what all of us should learn to live for the sake of our neighbor. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. Good works are, even in religion, folks, good works are not to save us. Good works are what we do for neighbor because of how much God loves us. And so what a great opportunity to live freely in this country again. Senator, thank you for your leadership. I guess my final question, how can we support your efforts for compassionate, just laws for unborn children, their mothers, their families? I mean, what more can we do as concerned, informed citizens? Well,
the prayers of millions, I do believe, has been part of why we're at this moment in history overturning Roe v. Wade. And there's when people ask what to pray for elected officials, for me, I ask for praying for, in the book of Daniel diffused a tough situation there, a Jewish kid in the land of foreign land, basically Iraq. And it says he had wisdom and tact. So it's wisdom here on Capitol Hill, but also tact. How do we communicate tactfully on issues right now that are so polarizing? But second is engage your elected officials. Make sure the pro-life Democrats, pro-life Republicans, pro-life independents are voicing their opinion. Because listen, the pro-abortion folks are very loud. We need the pro-life groups and pro-life believers here to continue to engage their officials and hold their elected officials accountable.
Well, we will do our part, and we will seek to also be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And I look forward to the time when we can again sit down face to face in the office. I really appreciate you being willing to come on the Liberty Alert today. God bless your leadership.
God bless you, Greg. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.